Some hungers are plain enough for any decent soul to see. A belly can cave in, a child can stop asking, a mother can learn to smile with nothing behind her teeth. But there are other hungers too, the kind that sit in a grown man's house after supper and make every chair sound empty. In the Utah desert country, where wind could sand the paint off a door and pride could starve a person faster than winter, two lonely people met because one small boy had gone 5 days without bread. Rebecca Doyle was crossing the platform at Cedar Junction with her son's weight pulling against both arms when the flour sack split under her elbow and spilled its last gray dust across the boards. She dropped to her knees before she could stop herself. The depot bell clanged above her, mule teams rattled beyond the street, and the westbound train stood panting smoke into the afternoon heat. Beside her, 6-year-old Caleb Doyle held a little wooden horse with one broken leg against his chest. He did not cry. That was what scared her most. He only watched the flour blow away. "Done, Mama," he whispered. Though she had not made a sound, Rebecca gathered what she could with trembling fingers, scraping dusty meal into the torn sack as if she could make supper from splinters and grit. Her cuff was frayed open. Her knees showed pale through the patched brown skirt. Caleb leaned against her shoulder, light as a bundle of kindling, and she could feel the heat of fever under his thin cotton shirt. "He has not eaten proper in 5 days," she said to no one, because shame had loosened her tongue, and there was no one kind enough nearby to hear. A boot stopped in front of the spilled flour. It was a plain boot, scuffed white with alkali dust, attached to a man who did not move right away. Rebecca saw a hem of a long canvas coat, the corner of a leather glove, and the shadow of a wide hat falling over her hands. She braced herself for laughter, or a curse, or the toe of that boot nudging her sack away from the passenger path. Instead, the man crouched. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "that flour's past saving." Rebecca closed her fingers around a pinch of it anyway. "Most things are, once folks say so." The man looked at the child, then back at her. His face was lean, sun-browned, and older than his years in the eyes. He had a scar along his jaw that pulled slightly when he spoke, and a stillness that made the depot noise seem foolish around him. Caleb hid the broken horse behind his ribs. The man noticed but pretended not to. "If this story touches a tender place in you, tell me where you are listening from tonight. Like it, share it with someone who still believes kindness can change a life, and subscribe for more Western stories of hard roads, brave hearts, and love earned slowly." The man rose and stepped to the depot door without asking permission. Rebecca should have run. She had learned that help often carried a hook hidden under the bait. But Caleb's knees folded beneath him, and she caught him just before his cheeks struck the boards. "Mama," he murmured, embarrassed by his own weakness. "I have you." Rebecca pressed him close, though her arms trembled. "I have you, baby." The man came back with a tin cup of water and a brown paper packet. He held them out, not to Rebecca first, but within her reach, as if he knew pride needed room to walk. "Biscuit," he said, "soft enough if you dip it." Rebecca stared at the packet. Hunger rose so sharply in her that she hated him for seeing it. She took the water first and put it to Caleb's mouth. The boy sipped twice, then looked up to her for permission before touching the biscuit. "Yay," she said. He broke off a piece no bigger than his thumb and offered it to her. That nearly ruined her. "No," she whispered. "You first." The man looked away then, not far, only toward the tracks, but enough to give them privacy. Rebecca fed Caleb in small pieces. The boy chewed carefully, as if each bite might vanish if he trusted it too much. Crumbs stuck to his lips. His little hand stayed clenched around the wooden horse. When the biscuit was gone, he licked his finger and pressed it to the paper for what remained. The man said, "Where are you headed?" "West," Rebecca answered. "That train goes west a long way. Then I suppose I am headed a long way." He studied her without staring. "You got people waiting." Rebecca folded the torn flour sack in her lap The lie came dressed and ready. A sister, a cousin, a church friend. Any one of them would have sounded better than the truth, but hunger had worn holes through her manners. No. The train conductor shouted for boarding. A few passengers glanced over and then away, grateful for business elsewhere. One woman in a feathered hat drew her skirts back so Rebecca's dust would not touch them. Caleb's eyes followed the movement, and Rebecca felt it like a slap across her own face. The man in the hat stood between them and the watching eyes. "My wagon's outside," he said. "I own a ranch 9 miles north of here. Cottonwood draw, there's food there. A stove, a bed in the lean-to room off the kitchen." Rebecca's back stiffened. "I did not ask for a bed, no, Mom, and I am not for sale because my boy is hungry." His eyes changed. Pain passed through them, quick and tightly held. "I did not say you were. Men do not offer beds for nothing. Most don't." She lifted her chin. "Do you? I offer work?" The words settled differently. Rebecca tightened her arm around Caleb. "What sort?" "Housekeeping, if you'll take it. Cooking, washing, mending, feeding hens, keeping the garden from dying. I have hands who eat like wolves and complain like widows. My ranch house has been empty of a woman's care for 3 years. I can pay $12 a month, board for you and the boy. And no man on my place will speak crooked to either of you and stay employed." It sounded too clean, too possible. Hope was a dangerous animal. Once allowed near the door, it clawed to get in. "What is your name?" Rebecca asked. "Grant Doyle." She looked up sharply. His mouth tightened with a tired flicker of humor. "I know. Same as yours, I'm guessing. Unless I heard the conductor wrong when he called your baggage. My husband's name was Doyle. Mine is my father's." He held out his hand, then seemed to think better of it and let it fall. "No kin that I know of," the conductor called again. Rebecca looked toward the train. There was no ticket in her pocket. There had not been enough money for one since Provo. She had stood on the platform only because standing looked less desperate than sitting in the dirt. Caleb tugged her sleeve. "Mama, will there be soup?" His voice broke the last board in her pride. Rebecca looked at Grant Doyle. "My son eats first, always." "Yes, ma'am. I keep my own door. You'll have a latch. And if I choose to leave, I drive you back to the depot myself." She searched his face for mockery and found none. Only the stillness again, and something behind it like a barn after fire. "Then I will work," she said, "until you give me reason not to." Grant nodded once, as if the matter had been settled in a business office instead of beside a dead flour sack and a starving child. He reached for her trunk. It was a small black thing with brass corners, one handle wrapped in twine. Rebecca flinched before she could stop herself. Grant paused. "You carry it." Shame warmed her face. "It is heavy." "I reckon it is." He did not touch it until she gave the smallest nod. Then he lifted it, as if it weighed nothing, and led them through the depot doors, into the white glare of Cedar Junction. His wagon stood near the livery, hitched to 2 bay horses with patient tails and dust on their flanks. A sack of feed lay in back beside a coil of rope, a broken shovel handle, and a crate of nails. Grant set the trunk in the wagon and helped Caleb up first. He did not offer Rebecca his hand until she placed one foot on the wheel hub and swayed. Then his palm rose beneath her elbow, not gripping, only waiting in case she fell. She took the help for half a breath. The road north ran through sagebrush and rabbit grass, past low red buttes and washes, cut deep by storms that had forgotten how to stay. Heat trembled over the land. The wagon wheels spoke in dry creaks. Caleb sat pressed against Rebecca with the wooden horse in his lap, too tired now even to ask questions. Grant drove with both hands loose on the reins. He did not feel the silence, and Rebecca was grateful. Men who talked too much often wanted to lead a woman into agreeing before she had heard what was being asked. After a mile, he reached beneath the seat and brought out another tin cup, a small cork jug, and a cloth-wrapped parcel. "Milk," he said, "and cold potatoes." Nothing fancy. Rebecca's throat tightened. You keep food under the seat for strangers. For myself, I missed dinner. She knew he was lying. Or perhaps not lying exactly, but rearranging the truth so she could keep a scrap of dignity. She gave Caleb the milk first. He drank too quickly and coughed. Grant slowed the team without a word. Little sips, Rebecca told him. Caleb obeyed. He had become a child who obeyed too quickly, and that hurt her more than defiance would have. When he had eaten half a potato, he leaned against her side and slept with his mouth open, still holding the broken horse. Rebecca covered him with her shawl, though the day was hot. Grant glanced once. Fever. Some hunger does that. Anything else? Pride, she said. In both of us. He nodded as if that answer made sense. The ranch appeared at the end of a long descent, tucked where a thin line of cottonwoods marked water underground. It was not grand. A low house of weathered boards stood with its back to the wind, porch sagging at one corner. A barn leaned but had not surrendered. The corral fence showed 3 fresh breaks. A woodpile sat half-stacked like a chore abandoned in grief. Hens scratched near a tip bucket. Beyond, dry pasture rolled toward blue hills. Rebecca saw work everywhere. That steadied her. Work she understood. Pity she did not. A big yellow dog rose from beneath the porch and barked twice. Caleb startled awake and clutched Rebecca's skirt. Easy, Grant called. Moses, mind yourself. The dog wagged once, and then sat, as if ashamed of his own noise. A ranch hand came from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was young, red-haired, with ears too large for his face. He stopped short at the sight of them. Mr. Doyle, Tom, tell the men supper's late. We've got company. Tom's eyes flicked to Rebecca's worn dress, then to Caleb. Something kind moved in his face and was quickly hidden by manners. Yes, sir. Grant climbed down. I'll see to the team. Kitchen's through that door. Pantry's on the left. There should be beans in the pot from morning, bread in the box if Tom didn't eat it all, and eggs if the hens felt generous. Rebecca looked at him. You trust me in your house? He met her gaze. I brought you here to feed your boy. The kitchen smelled of ashes, coffee grounds, and old grease. Dishes stood in a crooked pile. A skillet sat unwashed on the stove. The table bore knife marks and a ring where a lamp had leaked oil. On the sill above the sink was a cracked blue cup with no handle, holding 3 dried wildflowers, gone brittle with age. Rebecca noticed that cup before anything else. Caleb noticed the bread box. He stood before it, but did not open it. My eye? He asked. Rebecca closed her eyes for 1 second. Dress, baby. Inside was half a loaf wrapped in cloth. Caleb touched it with 1 finger. It's real. Rebecca turned away so he would not see what those words did to her. She found a knife, sliced bread, and put beans into a small bowl. Her hands remembered the work faster than her mind could command them. Stoke the stove. Thin the beans with water. Salt lightly. Cool the child's portion first. Check the milk. Clean the spoon with hot water because sickness followed faster than any outlaw followed money. Grant came in quietly as Caleb lifted the spoon. The boy ate the first bites like an animal afraid of being chased off. Then he slowed under Rebecca's hand on his shoulder. No one's taking it, she whispered. Grant heard. His jaw worked once. He went to the pump outside and filled a basin. By the time Rebecca had Caleb through half the bowl, Grant had washed his hands and set 2 more plates on the table. He stood awkwardly, as if uncertain whether he belonged in his own kitchen. You should eat, he said. So should your men. They can wait 10 minutes. Hungry men get unkind. Not on my ranch. Rebecca wanted to believe that. Instead, she served 3 plates and kept hers smallest. Grant noticed. He said nothing. He took the pot back to the stove, filled her plate until beans touched the bread, and set it down in front of her as if daring her to refuse. Rebecca stared at the plate. I work for what I eat, she said. Then consider this your first wage paid in advance, Mr. Doyle. Grant, he said. There are too many Doyles in this kitchen for mistering. The corner of Caleb's mouth moved. It was not a smile, not yet, but it remembered how. "My mom is a Doyle," he said. Grant looked at him. "So, I heard. You our people." The kitchen went still. Rebecca opened her mouth, but Grant answered first. "I can be people enough until your mama says otherwise." Caleb considered that with the grave suspicion of a hungry child. Then he dipped bread into beans and ate. That first night, Rebecca cleaned until heat left her knees shaking. Grant told her twice she could stop. She did not. She washed the dishes, wiped the table, swept mouse droppings from the corners, set the stove in order, and found a tin of dried apples behind a flour crock. She filled the kettle, folded dishcloths, and put Caleb in the lean-to room, where a narrow bed sat beneath a patched quilt. The room had one small window, a nail for hanging clothes, and a latch on the inside. Rebecca tested it 3 times. Grant stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "I be in the front room if you need anything. The men sleep in the bunkhouse. Tom's decent. Clem snores. Old Ezra curses in his dreams but not at women. Why is this room empty?" A shadow crossed his face. "My sister stayed there once. Where is she now?" "Married in Ogden." That was not the whole truth. Rebecca heard it by what he did not say. But she had secrets too, folded tighter than her spare stockings. When he left, she barred the door with a chair, though there was a latch. Caleb lay under the quilt, eyes open in the dark. "Mama, eyes. This a trick?" She sat on the bed beside him and touched his hair. It had gone coarse from dust and poor food. "I do not know yet." He said we could eat, tomorrow too. Rebecca swallowed. "Tomorrow too, if I do my work?" Caleb nodded. After a while he said, "I won't ask for much." She bent over him. "You are allowed to ask." He did not answer. Sleep took him like a fainting spell, sudden and deep. Rebecca stayed awake until the lamp burned low. From the wall came the small sounds of a house settling. Outside, a horse stamped, a coyote cried far off, and men spoke quietly in the bunkhouse. She opened her trunk and took out the one object she had not sold, a silver thimble dented near the rim. Her mother's. With it lay a folded letter from her dead husband, Daniel Doyle, written before fever took him in a mining camp outside Eureka. She did not read it. She knew every line by heart. She held the thimble in her palm and listened to her son breathing. In the morning, Grant found coffee waiting on the back of the stove. He stood in the kitchen doorway as if the sight confused him. The table had been scrubbed. The cracked blue cup on the sill had been washed and set back with fresh water holding 2 sprigs of sage bloom Caleb had picked at dawn. The stove burned clean. Bread dough rested beneath a cloth. Caleb sat at the table with a bowl of cornmeal mush, eating slowly because Rebecca had told him his stomach must remember kindness in small measures. Grant removed his hat. Rebecca looked up from kneading. "I used flour. That's what it's for. I'll account for it." He poured coffee. "I don't keep accounts in my kitchen." "Then you should. That advice part of your housekeeping?" "Yes." For the first time, his mouth almost smiled. The men came in after sunrise, 3 of them crowding the threshold and pretending not to stare. Tom washed at the pump before entering because Rebecca pointed at the basin. Clem, a broad-shouldered man with a drooping mustache, looked offended until Grant said, "You heard Mrs. Doyle, Mrs. Doyle." Rebecca's hands stilled. The name belonged to widowhood and worry, but in Grant's mouth it sounded like something defended. Old Ezra, bent and gray as fence wire, sniffed the air. "That bread? It will be," Rebecca said, "if no one opens the oven." Ezra looked at Grant. "She talks like my first wife. Then mind her like you, Shanvam, the first wife," Grant said. The men laughed softly, not cruelly, and something in the kitchen eased. Work made the days less frightening. Rebecca rose before the sun, built the stove fire, set coffee, fed Caleb, gathered eggs, and learned which hen pecked ankles. She patched 3 shirts, boiled laundry in a black kettle, and strung it between porch posts where the wind snapped cloth like flags of surrender, made useful again. She cleaned the pantry, counted beans, marked sugar, and told Grant his smokehouse latch was inviting every raccoon in Utah to supper. He fixed it before sundown. She pointed out the porch step that dipped. He mended it the next morning. She asked for a garden hoe. He brought two, one with a handle smooth from old use, and one new from town. "I only need one," she said. "Caleb might want the smaller." Caleb did. He followed Rebecca into the patch behind the house, where bean poles stood crooked and squash vines lay thirsty. He was still weak, but he liked work that let him be near her. He carried weeds in a tin pail and checked the sky often, as if watching for the return of hunger like weather. Grant watched from the corral sometimes. He never hovered. He repaired fence with Tom, gentled a gray mare that bit at everyone but him, and rode out before dawn to check cattle scattered along the draw. At supper, he ate what was set before him without complaint, though Rebecca once burned the gravy and waited for a harsh word out of old habit. Grant took a second biscuit. Caleb watched him. "Do you like burned gravy?" "No," Grant said. "Then why eat it?" Grant broke the biscuit. "Because somebody stood near a hot stove to make it." Rebecca turned to the sink with the coffee pot and did not speak for several minutes. By the second week, Caleb's cheeks lost their grayness. He began leaving the broken wooden horse on the kitchen sill while he worked, as if trusting it would still be there when he came back. He named the yellow dog Moses Proper, because the dog sat very straight whenever Rebecca held a spoon. At night, Rebecca mended by lamplight in the kitchen after Caleb slept. Grant often came in late, smelling of horse and leather and dust. He would pour coffee from the pot she kept warm without mentioning that she kept it warm. Then he would sit at the far end of the table with ranch ledgers, his pencil moving slowly through numbers that did not please him. One night she said, "You are short on cash." His pencil stopped. "You leave bills under the flour crock," she said. The bank notice was folded inside the seed catalog. I was not prying. Mice were. Grant leaned back. "Mice read now. They chew with understanding." He rubbed his eyes. 2 bad winters. Fever took 6 hands in the valley 3 years ago. Drought took grass last summer. I owe Silas Venn at the bank more than I like. Does he press you? He presses everyone. It's his gift. Rebecca drew the needle through a torn cuff. "Then why hire me?" Grant looked at the lamp flame. "Because a boy had not eaten in 5 days. The words sat between them, plain and heavy. "You do not know us," she said. "No, we could be thieves. You cleaned the pantry before you slept. We could still be thieves. Then you're slow ones." Her hands paused. Against her will, a small laugh escaped. It startled her so much she looked toward Caleb's room, afraid it might wake him. Grant looked startled too. Then he looked down at his ledger, and the room went quiet in a gentler way. A few nights later, a storm came without rain. Wind struck the house with fist after fist. Sand hissed against the windows. The barn door banged until Grant went out to fasten it, coat pulled over his head. Caleb woke crying, not loud, but with the thin panic of a child who knew bad things came when adults slept. Rebecca found him kneeling on the bed, clutching his horse. "We have to go," he whispered. "The men will make us go." "No one is making us go." He said that before. Rebecca froze. Grant, coming down the hall with rainless dust on his coat, stopped at the open kitchen door. Caleb saw him and shrank back. Rebecca turned. "This is not your matter." Grant took one step back. "No, ma'am." But Caleb had already buried his face in the quilt. The old wound had been open. Rebecca could not stuff it away again. She sat beside her son until his breathing slowed. When she came back to the kitchen, Grant was at the stove, placing another stick of wood with careful hands. "He had not gone to bed." "He hurt," she said. "I did. His father was not the one who made us go." Grant nodded. Rebecca folded her arms against a chill that had nothing to do with weather. "After Daniel died, I worked at a boarding house in Eureka. The owner said Caleb ate too much, said a widow with a child brought down the tone. One morning our things were in the alley. Caleb was holding that wooden horse. It had been his father's last carving for him. Grant's face hardened, but his voice stayed low. Name. That anger will not feed anybody. No, but it might keep me warm. She should not have smiled. She did anyway, and it broke quickly. I took washing, then sewing, then nothing. People say there is work for a woman if she is willing, but they often mean work that takes more than wages. So I kept walking. Grant stared at the stove. I had a wife once. Rebecca had guessed as much, but hearing it shifted something under her feet. Her name was Anna, he said. She liked blue cups. Hated this country at first. Said the wind was a gossip because it never stopped talking. His eyes moved to the cracked cup on the sill. She was carrying our child when fever came through. I was out with cattle 2 days longer than I should have. When I got back, the house was full of women from town, and nobody would look at me straight. Rebecca's fingers tightened around her own elbows. Grant looked at her then. That room you sleep in was where my sister stayed after. She took care of things because I would not. Then she left to save herself from my silence. The wind struck the house hard enough to rattle the lamp chimney. Rebecca said, "You could not have outrun fever." "No, but you have tried to outrun being alive." He looked at her for a long moment. There was no offense in his face, only recognition, and perhaps gratitude that someone had named the thing without pity. At last he said, "You speak plain when it's dark, and you answer more when the wind is loud." That was the first quiet night conversation that belonged to them, though neither would have admitted it. Nothing changed in a way the town could see. Yet the next morning, Grant oiled the latch on Rebecca's door, so it would close smoother, and Rebecca moved Anna's cracked blue cup from the sill to a shelf where it would not fall. She left the sage bloom in it. Cedar Junction began talking by the end of the month. It started at Haskett's general store, where Rebecca went with Grant to buy salt, lamp oil, and calico for patching. Caleb came too, walking close enough that his knuckles brushed Rebecca's skirt. Grant carried a crate of eggs for trade and greeted people with the same spare nod he gave fence posts. Mrs. Lila Haskett looked Rebecca over from bonnet to boots. Her husband, Abner Haskett, stood behind the counter with tone tucked in his vest and a smile that had never gone hungry. "Well," Mrs. Haskett said, "Mr. Doyle has brought a housekeeper." Grant set the eggs down. "Mrs. Doyle keeps my house." The woman blinked at the shared name. "How convenient." Rebecca chose lamp wicks from a drawer and kept her face still. She had survived sharper knives than Tone. Abner Haskett leaned over the counter. "Heard you came in on the platform with no baggage worth mentioning." Grant's hand settled on the crate. "You hear too much, Abner. A man hears what happens in his own town. Then hear this. You'll put 10 pounds of flour, 2 of sugar, coffee, salt pork, and the blue calico on my account." Abner's smile thinned. "Your account is already long." Grant's shoulders did not move, but the air changed. "Then shorten it with the eggs and my no do it month end." Rebecca stepped forward. "I can do without the calico." "No," Grant said. "It is only patches. You asked for it." "I asked before I knew." Grant turned to her, his voice lowered. "A woman should not have to explain needing cloth." That simple sentence silenced more than the store. Mrs. Haskett looked away. Caleb stared up at Grant with something new in his face. Not trust exactly, but the first brick of it. Abner wrapped the goods poorly, tossing the flour harder than needed. "Silas Venn was looking for you, Grant. Bank business. Said he'd ride out if you didn't come in." "Then hell, get exercise," Grant said. Outside, Rebecca took the smaller sack despite Grant's frown. "You should not have spoken so, T.O. Haskett." "T.O. everyone." He tied the flour into the wagon. "You needed cloth. You made it sound like I mattered." Grant looked at her then, and the street noise seemed to move away. "You do." She had no answer for that. So she climbed into the wagon and spent the ride home folding the blue calico in her lap as if it were something breakable. The pressure came 2 days later in a black buggy with polished wheels. Silas Van arrived at Cottonwood Draw wearing a city suit too fine for dust and a hat too narrow for sun. He was a banker with careful hands and a voice smoothed by practice. Rebecca saw him from the garden where she and Caleb were tying bean vines. Grant was in the corral, working with the gray mare. Caleb whispered, "Is he bad?" Rebecca looked at the buggy, then at the man stepping down with papers in one hand. "He is expensive." Ven greeted Grant with a smile that did not reach the corners. "Doyle, fine place. If one likes watching boards dry out." Grant closed the corral gate. "State your business." "I prefer shade. I prefer plain talk." Ven's eyes moved toward Rebecca. "And I prefer not to discuss a man's debts in front of hired women." Grant did not look back at her. "Mrs. Doyle handles my household accounts." "Speak." Ven's eyebrows lifted. "Mrs. Doyle, no relation," Rebecca said from the garden. "No scandal either, though I understand disappointment needs feeding." Tom, from the barn roof where he was patching shingles, coughed into his sleeve to hide a laugh. Ven's smile tightened. "You owe 3 payments. Drought does not excuse ink. If the cattle sale next month does not cover arrears, I will begin proceedings on the east pasture." Grant said nothing. Rebecca saw then what the pasture meant. His eyes flicked just once toward the cottonwoods and the low grass beyond. Not the richest land, perhaps, but land that held water in dry country. Lose that, and the ranch would bleed slowly. Ven continued, "There is another solution. My niece is widowed, respectable, no child. A marriage alliance could ease terms." Grant's face went blank in a way Rebecca disliked. "My private life is not collateral." "All life is collateral when money is owed." Rebecca stood, dusting her hands. "Then your soul must be mortgaged clean through." Ven looked at her with open distaste. "Careful, madam. A woman in your position should not mistake temporary shelter for standing." Caleb stepped in front of Rebecca before any adult could move. He held the small hoe like a rifle, though it was nearly as tall as he was. "Don't talk mean to my mama." The gray mare threw her head. The dog rose, growling from the porch. The whole ranch seemed to pause. Grant walked to Caleb, crouched, and gently took the hoe. "That was brave," he said, "but tools are for earth, not men who don't know better." Caleb's chin trembled. He sounded like the boarding house man. Grant's eyes lifted to Ven. The banker took a step back, perhaps because Grant's stillness had sharpened. "You have until cattle sale," Ven said. "After that, sentiment will not matter." Grant stood. "It never has to mend like you." When the buggy left, Rebecca went to the pump and washed her hands longer than needed. Grant came to stand near the porch. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For bringing that to your door." "It is your door." He looked at the house. "Doesn't feel only mine lately." She gripped the pump handle. Water ran over her fingers, cold from underground. "Do not say things to make me soften when you might lose this place." "I say less than I mean." She glanced at him, but his face had turned toward the pasture. That night, Rebecca took out her thimble and Daniel's letter. She laid both on the quilt while Caleb slept. Her husband's words had once been comfort. "Beck, keep our boy laughing. Keep your needle sharp. Trust God when men fail." But ink could not buy flour. Memory could not build a fence. Love for the dead, if held too tightly, could become another locked door. She folded the letter and tucked it away. The next morning she went through the pantry, the smokehouse, and the accounts. Grant found her at the table with paper, pencil, and the flour crock open. "You robbing me slow?" he asked. "I am finding money you have already wasted." "That sounds worse." "You buy bacon in town when you have hogs enough to cure." "You lose eggs because the nesting boxes are broken." "The garden can be doubled if we run a ditch from the wash." "Your hands drink coffee like it falls from heaven." "And someone is stealing nails from the barn." Grant leaned against the doorframe. That all? No. Your shirts are ruined because you hang them on raw pegs. The east fence loses cattle because the lower rail is rotted. The hens need lime. The pump leather is failing. And if you sell butter in town instead of only eggs, Mrs. Haskett will buy it because she is too proud to admit mine is better. Grant stared. Rebecca lifted the pencil. I can save you $9 this month. Might be $12 next. You can do all that? I kept a boarding house running when the owner drank half the profit and blamed the cook. Grant stepped into the kitchen slowly, as if approaching a skittish horse. What do you need? A churn that does not leak, 2 yards of muslin, lime, a fair price for butter, and your men to stop thinking the dishpan is a suggestion. They'll hate that last one. They will survive. He took off his hat and set it on the table. Mrs. Doyle, I believe Cottonwood Draw has been under poor management. Yes, she said, but it has good bones. He looked at her then, and warmth rose in the room despite the low fire. Under Rebecca's hand, the ranch began to change, not grandly. Nothing in that country changed grandly unless it was storm or death. It changed by inches. The woodpile grew straight and high because Caleb stacked kindling each morning after breakfast, making careful little walls and stepping back to inspect them. The hens laid better after Grant fixed the nesting boxes, and Caleb learned to reach beneath them without fear, though he still whispered apologies to the red hen that pecked. Rebecca boiled laundry on Mondays. Shirts that had gone gray turned white enough to shame the men into shaving. She mended curtains from flour sacks and hung them in the kitchen, where evening light came through soft instead of harsh. She planted marigolds at the garden edge because her mother had said they kept bugs away, and because orange against dust looked like courage. Grant repaired the corral gate so it no longer screamed. Tom fixed the barn roof under her direction and told her she had the eye of a general. Old Ezra built a small shelf by the stove for spices and said if anyone asked, he had thought of it. Clem brought in rabbits twice and left them at the kitchen door without comment, then blushed when Rebecca made stew. Caleb changed too, slowly, as starved children do. He stopped hiding crusts in his pocket after Rebecca found 3 under his pillow and cried where he could not see. He began asking questions again. How far could a horse smell water? Did cows miss their mothers? Would Moses proper go to heaven if he kept stealing biscuits? At supper he sat beside Grant by choice, though he still checked Rebecca's face before taking seconds. One afternoon Grant brought him a small knife. Rebecca stiffened. Grant placed it on the table between them, still folded, for carving. Only with permission, Caleb touched it like treasure. For my horse? For making him a new leg? I don't know how. I can show you. Rebecca watched them on the porch that evening, Grant's large hand guiding Caleb's small one. Both bent over a scrap of cedar. The broken horse lay between them. Moses slept below the step. The sun spread red across the draw, and for one cruelly sweet moment, Rebecca could almost imagine the world had been made for peace. Then a cough came from Caleb that bent him double. It worsened by midnight. Fever rose under his skin. His breath turned shallow. Rebecca sat with him in the lean-to room, bathing his face, counting the spaces between coughs. Grant rode for the doctor before dawn, taking the gray mare because she was fastest and mean enough to outrun the devil. The doctor was away on a berth. Grant returned with Mrs. Haskett instead. Rebecca almost refused her at the door. Pride reared up, remembering the store, the look, the word convenient. But Caleb coughed again, and pride became small beside fear. Mrs. Haskett removed her gloves. I brought horehound mustard and a poultice cloth. I know you do not like me. Rebecca stepped aside. My liking does not matter. I does some, the woman said quietly, but not today. All day they worked over Caleb. Steam kettle, mustard, poultice, spoonfuls of broth, cool cloths. Grant stood useless until Rebecca told him to bring wood, then water. then more wood, then to sit where Caleb could see him when he woke. He obeyed every order as if she were captain, and he a green hand. Near evening, Caleb's fever broke enough for him to whisper, "Don, let the banker take the beans." Rebecca laughed through tears before she could stop herself. Grant turned his face away and pressed his hand hard over his eyes. Mrs. Haskett left after dark. At the porch, she paused beside Rebecca. "I judged you. I was wrong. Yes." The woman looked down. "There are women in town who would help if asked proper." Rebecca's weariness made her honest. "I do not know how to ask proper anymore." Mrs. Haskett nodded. "Then I'll ask him proper for you." After she left, Rebecca returned to Caleb's room and found Grant asleep upright in the chair, one hand resting near the boy's blanket, but not touching, as if even in sleep he would not take what was not offered. The lamp showed the lines of grief around his mouth. She remembered Anna, the fever, the child that never cried in this house. She took the spare quilt from the foot of the bed and laid it over Grant's shoulders. He woke just enough to murmur, "I should have been here." Rebecca knew he was not speaking of Caleb. She stood beside him in the low lamplight. "You are here now." His eyes opened. Something unguarded looked out at her, gone almost as soon as it appeared. He nodded once, swallowed, and looked back at the sleeping boy. The midpoint came the week before cattle sale. Rebecca found the letter in the flour crock, not from mice this time, but because Grant had left it there by mistake or exhaustion. Silas Venn had offered to buy the east pasture outright for less than half its value, enough to clear the arrears and leave Grant with the house, the barn, and land too dry to support the herd. Refusal meant foreclosure proceedings if the sale failed. She also found Grant's note, unfinished, to his sister in Ogden. "I have brought a widow and child into this mess. If things go badly, I need you to help place them somewhere decent. The boy is small. The mother is proud. Do not let her refuse." Rebecca stood with the letter in hand until the kitchen blurred. That afternoon, while Grant was out repairing fence, she packed her trunk. She told herself it was mercy. He could not afford them. Her presence invited gossip, complication, extra mouths, and feelings neither of them had named. She would leave before he sacrificed land for pity. She would find work in Cedar Junction or farther west. She had survived before. Caleb watched from the bed, pale still but sitting up. "Are we bad?" "No." "Then why are we going?" "Because Mr. Doyle has trouble. We can help. We have helped. Now we must not become one more trouble." Caleb hugged a wooden horse to his chest. Grant had carved the new leg smooth and fitted it with a tiny peg. "I don't want to be hungry somewhere else." Rebecca's hands froze on a folded shirt. The words landed harder than any accusation. "I know," she whispered. She hitched the trunk rope herself and carried it to the porch. The sky had gone that strange green-gray. That meant weather building beyond the hills. Dust moved low over the yard. Grant rode in at dusk, saw the trunk, and reined the gray mare so sharply she tossed her head. He dismounted without tying the reins. Rebecca stood on the porch. "We are leaving in the morning." No, it was not loud. That made it worse. "You do not decide." Grant took 3 steps, then stopped below the porch as if the height of one stair mattered. "No, I do not. But you're not leaving because of a letter you found in my flour crock?" Color drained from her face. He saw the truth and exhaled. "I wondered where I put it." "You were going to send us away. I was trying to make sure you had a place if I failed. You should have spoken to me." Yes, the admission took some of her anger's footing. She gripped the porch post. "You owe money. Your pasture is at risk. Your reputation is already being chewed in town. I will not stand here and watch you ruin yourself because my child was hungry on a platform." Grant's face changed, not with anger, with hurt deep enough to steady itself before it walked. "I did not bring you here because of 5 days," he said. "I brought you here because in 5 days your boy learned not to cry. and no child should have to become that quiet. Rebecca turned her head, but he kept speaking. And I am not ruined by feeding people at my table. I was ruined before you came. I was a man with a house and no home, land and no future, breath and no use for it past work. He swallowed. You and Caleb did not make me weaker. The wind pushed dust across the yard. Rebecca whispered, Grant. He took one more step, placed his hand on the trunk, and not on her. Stay. It was one word. No grand speech, no promise he could not keep, just one simple sentence laid bare in the dust. Caleb appeared behind Rebecca, blanket around his shoulders. Mama, Moses hid a biscuit under the porch. We could eat that if things get bad. Grant closed his eyes briefly. Rebecca knelt and pulled her son close. She felt his thin back, stronger now, but not strong enough for another road. Then she looked at the ranch, the woodpile, the garden, the repaired gate, the laundry line, the barn roof patched against storm, the place that had begun to hold their fingerprints. She stood. I will stay, she said, but not as a burden. Grant's hand fell from the trunk. You never were. The storm broke that night. Rain came hard, rare, and violent, turning dust to red mud and filling the washes faster than a man could swear. Lightning showed the cottonwoods bending. The cattle bawled from the low pasture. At midnight, Tom pounded on the kitchen door. Fence washed out east draw. Grant was already reaching for his coat. Rebecca lit the lantern with hands that did not shake. Caleb, stay in bed. I can hold the light, he said. You can breathe and get well. That is your work. He looked ready to argue, then coughed and sank back. Grant and the men rode into the storm. Rebecca could not sit still. She set coffee, packed biscuits in a cloth, filled a jug, and when an hour passed with no sign of them, she wrapped herself in Grant's old canvas coat and stepped onto the porch. Caleb called weakly, Mama, I am going to the barn. No farther. That was the first lie she had told him in weeks. At the barn, she found Moses whining toward the east pasture. The lantern light shook in her hand. She heard cattle bawling, men shouting, water tearing at brush. She followed the sound to the wash where the fence had broken and cattle were bunching in panic near a cutbank. Grant was in the mud below, rope around his waist, trying to free a calf tangled in wire while Tom and Clem held the line. Get back, Grant shouted when he saw her. Rebecca ignored him. She hung the lantern on a mesquite branch, slid down the bank, and plunged both hands into freezing mud. Tell me what to do, Rebecca. The calf is choking. Tell me what to do. Grant looked at her once, then pointed. Hold the wire up when I lift. She did. Barbs tore her palm. The calf thrashed. Water surged around her ankles, dragging at her skirt. Grant cut the wire with fence pliers, cursed when the handle slipped, and cut again. Rebecca held until her hands burned. At last the calf lurched free and scrambled up the bank. Then the mud under Rebecca gave way. She dropped hard, one foot sliding toward the wash. Grant caught her wrist. For one suspended breath, the storm had all of her weight. Don't let go, she gasped. His grip tightened. Never. Clem and Tom hauled them both up by rope and coat, all of them landing in mud like fools born of thunder. Rebecca lay on her back in the rain, laughing once from terror, then crying because the two sounds had gotten tangled. Grant bent over her, rain running off his hat brim. You hurt, my proud dude? Good, good, he said, voice rough. It needed softening. She wanted to scold him, but her fingers were still locked around his sleeve. By dawn, the storm had passed. The east fence was broken but not lost. 3 cattle had strayed, 1 calf was saved, and every man at Cottonwood draw looked carved from mud. Rebecca's hands were torn. Grant bandaged them at the kitchen table with more gentleness than skill. You rap like a blacksmith, she said. You bleed like a stubborn woman. Caleb, propped in the doorway with his quilt, looked from one to the other. Are we keeping the calf? Grant tied the bandage. If he lives, his name is Biscuit. Rebecca laughed. Grant did not, but his eyes warmed. The cattle sale drew near with the ranch battered but standing. Rebecca's butter money had helped. The saved eggs helped. So did the repaired fence and the calves Grant managed not to lose. But not enough. On the morning they drove cattle toward Cedar Junction, Grant wore his best shirt, the one Rebecca had mended at the cuff with blue thread because white had run out. She noticed he had not changed it. "You have another shirt," she said. "This one holds. It shows the mending." "I know." Caleb rode in the wagon beside Rebecca, still too weak for long walking, but bright-eyed under Grant's old hat, which swallowed his ears. The cattle moved ahead in a dusty, complaining river. Tom and Clem rode flanked. Ezra drove the supply wagon and sang one verse of a hymn over and over, because those were the only words he remembered. Town gathered for sale day. Ranchers, buyers, bankers, storekeepers, children on fence rails. Silas Venn stood near the stock pens with papers in his pocket. Abner Haskett watched from his storefront. Mrs. Haskett came to Rebecca with a small basket. "For Caleb," she said, "molasses cookies. Not too many at once." Caleb looked to Rebecca, then took one. "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Haskett's face softened. "You are welcome, Mr. Caleb." The sale began well, then turned mean. A buyer from Nevada complained the cattle were too lean. Another said drought stock always sickened on the trail. Prices fell with every pen. Grant's face gave nothing away, but Rebecca knew numbers now. She felt each low bid strike like a hammer. Silas Venn approached near noon. "You will not clear it." Grant watched a pen gate close. "Sale isn't done." "It is done enough. Sign over the east pasture today, and I'll leave you the house untroubled." Rebecca stepped forward. "The east pasture holds his water." Venn smiled. Then he should have paid for the privilege of keeping it. A small crowd had begun to listen. Gossip loved money almost as much as shame. Grant's voice stayed even. "I'll settle after final count. Or you can settle now before more people understand how badly you fail." Rebecca felt Caleb press against her skirt. The boy's breathing quickened. Then Abner Haskett said from the edge of the crowd, "I heard there's another account to consider." Rebecca turned. The storekeeper held up a ledger. His wife stood beside him, pale but firm. Abner cleared his throat. "Mrs. Rebecca Doyle has been selling butter, eggs, mending, and preserves through my store. Money held on account, $21.40. Rebecca stared. "That cannot be right." Mrs. Haskett lifted her chin. "It is. I raised the price after Mrs. Bell said your peach preserves were better than mine." Out of spite, mostly. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Rebecca shook her head. "I told you to apply it to flour and supplies." "Who did?" Abner said. "This is after." Grant looked at Rebecca as if he had never seen courage take the shape of butter before. Venn's mouth tightened. "A woman's egg money will not save a ranch." "No," said Tom from behind him, "but it might help." He stepped forward and placed a small pouch in Grant's hand. Clem followed, then Ezra. "Wages held back by choice," they said. "Not forgiven, just delayed." Cottonwood draw fed them. They could wait a month. Grant's face darkened. "I won't take your pay." Ezra spat into the dust. "A man too proud to be helped ought not feed others neither." "Take it." More laughter, warmer this time. Still, it was not enough. Rebecca saw it in Grant's eyes before he turned back to Venn. Then Caleb stepped away from her. He walked to Grant, holding the repaired wooden horse in both hands. "Sell this?" Rebecca's breath caught. "Caleb, no." The boy's chin trembled, but he held the horse out. "Mr. Grant fixed it. It's worth something now." Grant went very still. Around them, the crowd quieted. Venn gave a soft, dismissive laugh. "Touching. Shall we auction toys next?" Grant turned on him. For the first time since Rebecca had known him, his voice rose. "You will not mock a child who knows more about sacrifice than you ever will." The words cracked across the yard. Venn stepped back. Grant took the wooden horse gently from Caleb, looked at it, and then placed it in his own coat pocket. "This is not for sale," he said. "Not land, not dignity, not children's keepsakes, not women who work harder than men who judge them. Not this home." Ven's eyes narrowed. "Fine speech. Still short on money." "Yes," Grant said, "I am." He reached into his inside pocket and removed a folded paper. Rebecca recognized the deed before she understood. Not the east pasture. Something else. Grant looked at her, and in that look she saw what he was about to do. "No," she whispered. He spoke to Ven. "I own a strip along the old freight road west of town. Anna's father deeded it to us when we married. I kept it because he liked the view. You've wanted it for the rail spur." Ven's expression shifted with hunger. "That land is worth more than your arrears. Then you'll mark my debt current through winter, release claim on the east pasture, and put the balance toward my feed account at Haskett's." Rebecca moved to him. "Grant, that was hers." His jaw tightened. "The dead do not need views as much as the living need water." It was not coldly said. It cost him. She could see the cost in the way his hand held the paper, in the tremor he could not fully hide. Ven looked delighted enough to be ugly. "Don, not here." Grant folded the paper. "At the bank, with witnesses. Mrs. Doyle will read the terms." Ven scoffed. "She is not your wife." Grant looked at Rebecca. The whole town seemed to lean in, greedy for scandal, hungry for tenderness, ready to punish either. "No," Grant said quietly. "She is not my wife. She is the woman who made my house a home, saved my accounts, stood in floodwater to save my stock, and kept a child alive when the world had taught him to stop asking. You will speak her name with respect." Rebecca could not move. Caleb reached for her hand. She held it hard enough that he leaned against her leg. Grant turned back to Ven. "And if someday she chooses my name in any way more than she already carries it, that will be because I earned the asking, not because hunger forced her hand." That was the public vow. Not a proposal, not a claim, a defense, a promise that her dignity would not be used as payment for rescue. Mrs. Haskett began to cry into her handkerchief. Old Ezra muttered that dust was in his eyes. Abner Haskett looked ashamed of every word he had ever let sit in his mouth. Ven got his land in the end. Men like Ven often get something. But he did not get the east pasture. He did not get Rebecca's shame. He did not get the pleasure of seeing Grant bend in the way cruel men enjoy. At the bank, Rebecca read every line. She found 2 tricks, crossed them out, and made Ven initial the changes while Grant watched with an expression that almost became pride. When it was done, the ranch stood safe through winter. On the ride home, nobody spoke for a long time. Caleb slept between them on the wagon seat, one hand tucked around the repaired horse Grant had given back. The sky turned lavender over the desert. Hooves thudded softly. Behind them, Cedar Junction shrank into dust and evening bells. Rebecca finally said, "You sold Anna's view." Grant kept his eyes on the team. "I kept her cup." "That is not the same." "No, are you sorry?" He thought about it long enough for the answer to be honest. "I am sorry she died. I am sorry I let a piece of land stand in for remembering her. I am not sorry Caleb will eat this winter." Rebecca looked down at her son. His mouth was soft in sleep. A cookie crumb clung to his collar. She said, "Daniel would have liked you." Grant's hands tightened on the reins. "He was gentle," she continued, "too trusting. He believed every hard season was just before a good one. I was angry at him for dying with that belief still in him." "Are you still?" "Sometimes." She watched the road. "Less today." Grant nodded. After a while he said, "Anna would have liked you. You would have frightened her first." "Good, she needed frightening." "I did too." The wagon rolled on through the cooling dark. The first star appeared above the cottonwoods before the ranch came into sight. Winter preparations began the next morning. There was no sudden happiness, no music swelling over the draw. There was wood to cut, a smokehouse to fill, fence to brace, beans to dry, quilts to air, and death still crouched at the edge of every decision. But hope entered the work quietly and stayed. Grant built a proper shelf in Rebecca's lean-to room without being asked, then another for Caleb's carved things. Caleb had 3 by then: the horse, a crooked cow, and a small dog that looked nothing like Moses but was praised anyway. Rebecca sewed curtains from the blue calico, not for the kitchen patches as intended, but for Caleb's window. When morning light passed through them, the room looked washed in sky. The garden yielded late squash, beans, onions, and stubborn carrots shaped like twisted fingers. Rebecca put up jars until the pantry shelves shone with amber and green. The hens survived Caleb's affection. Biscuit the calf lived and followed the boy around the yard with disgraceful devotion. Grant came in one cold evening, carrying a small parcel wrapped in newspaper. Rebecca was kneading dough. "If that is more work, leave it outside, it might be." He set it on the table. Inside was a Bible, worn but sound, with a pressed cottonwood leaf between the pages. "I found it in a trunk," he said. "Anna's." "Thought might be Caleb. Unless you don't want." Rebecca touched the cover. Her own Bible had been sold for medicine before Daniel died. She had told herself God could hear without leather and paper. But seeing one again made her throat ache. "Thank you." Grant shifted. "There's writing inside." She opened it. Anna's hand curved neatly across the first page. "For our home, whatever it becomes." Rebecca read it twice. "That is a blessing," she said. Grant looked away. "I thought so too." They began reading a few verses after supper. Not every night. Some nights, exhaustion won. Some nights Caleb fell asleep with his head on the table before the first word. But often, when dishes were done and the stove settled into a red glow, Rebecca read aloud while Grant carved or mended harness and Caleb leaned against Moses proper. Her voice filled corners that had been silent too long. One Sunday, they went to church. Rebecca wore her brown dress, cleaned and mended, with a blue calico collar. Caleb wore boots Grant had bought in town, a little large but stuffed at the toes with wool. Grant wore the mended shirt again. When they entered, heads turned. Some faces warmed, some sharpened. Mrs. Haskett moved down the pew and made room. That small act did more than a sermon. After service, a widow named Mrs. Bell asked Rebecca about preserves. Another woman asked if Caleb might join the school lessons in town twice a week. Abner Haskett apologized without looking directly at her, which was perhaps the only way he knew how. Silas Venn passed them near the gate. He tipped his hat to Grant and ignored Rebecca. Caleb spoke before anyone else could. "You forgot my mama." Venn stopped. Grant's hand rested lightly on Caleb's shoulder, but he did not silence him. Venn's face colored. "Good day, Mrs. Doyle." Rebecca gave him the smallest nod. "Mr. Venn." Caleb beamed as if he had repaired the world. "On the ride home?" he asked. "Was that rude?" Rebecca said. "A little," Grant said. "Necessary things often are." Snow came early in the high country, though the ranch itself saw more frost than white. Cold made the house draw inward. Coffee stayed warm on the stove. Socks dried near the hearth. Grant's coat often appeared over Rebecca's chair before she realized she was chilled. She began leaving his supper covered when he came in late, then stopped pretending it was only because food should not be wasted. One evening, she found him in the barn standing beside the gray mare, not working, just holding Anna's cracked blue cup. He had taken it from the shelf. Rebecca stopped in the doorway. "I thought I was ready to put it away," he said. "You do not have to be. I don't know where things belong anymore." She came to stand beside him. The mare shifted, warm breath clouding the air. Rebecca said, "Some things belong where they can be remembered without stopping the living." Grant looked at the cup. "And where is that?" She took it gently, their fingers brushing. "The kitchen shelf, with flowers in it when there are flowers. Empty when there are not." He nodded. "That sounds right." They stood in the barn's dim warmth, listening to horses chew hay. Outside, Caleb laughed at something Tom said by the woodpile. The sound moved through Grant like weather through grass. "I am afraid," he said. Rebecca did not ask of what, she knew. "So am I," she said. He looked at her then, and the space between them seemed smaller than it had ever been. Yet neither crossed it, not with hands, not yet. In January, Caleb grew sick again, though not so near death as before. A deep cough held him in bed for a week. Rebecca stayed beside him, and Grant took over more housework than any rancher would admit under oath. He burned porridge. He folded laundry badly. He fed the hens too much and created a revolt of poultry at the back door. Caleb laughed until coughing stopped him, then declared Mr. Grant a danger to domestic peace. But each evening, Grant came into the lean-to room with a cup of broth and sat until Caleb drank. The boy, feverish and half asleep, began reaching for his hand. Grant let him. One night, Caleb whispered, "If Mama marries again, do I have to stop loving Papa?" Rebecca, sitting in the shadows, went still. Grant did not look at her. He looked at the boy. "No," he said. "Love is not a chair with room for one. It's more like a fire. If tended right, it gives heat enough for all who come near." Caleb thought about that. "Would you tend it?" Grant's voice roughened. "I would try." Caleb nodded and fell asleep, still holding his hand. Rebecca left the room before tears could make sound. Grant found her on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, staring into the cold. "I did not mean to overstep," he said. "You did not. I know he had a father. I would not take his place." "No," she looked at him. "You have made your own." The porch boards creaked under his weight as he stood beside her. Frost silvered the yard. The woodpile Caleb had stacked rose neat beneath a tarp. The barn lantern glowed. Somewhere in the dark, a cow lowed softly. Grant said, "Rebecca, I cannot offer ease. I have never trusted ease. I still owe money. I am stubborn, poor at speaking, worse at forgiving myself. I know that too." He gave a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. Then he turned, not fully facing her, as if direct hope might frighten them both. "I can offer this house as long as I have it. Work beside yours. My name, though you already have one like it. My table. My protection, though you've proved you are no helpless thing. My listening, when I remember how. And my best effort not to make grief master over what comes next." Rebecca held the shawl closed at her throat. "I asked that an offer. Yes, it was not the offer from the platform, not work for food, not shelter for survival. This one had no hunger forcing it, no debt hiding behind it. It stood in the cold, on its own feet." She thought of Daniel's letter, Anna's cup, Caleb's empty eyes at the depot, Grant crouching beside spilled flour, the fence in storm water, blue curtains, coffee kept warm. A child learning to ask for seconds. She thought of herself, not rescued like a parcel from rain, but working, choosing, staying, changing the shape of a lonely ranch with her own hands. "I will not marry from gratitude," she said. "I would not ask it. I will not be taken in like charity." "You never were." "I will keep Daniel's letter. I will keep Daniel's letter. I'll build the shelf." She looked at him then. "And Anna's cup stays in the kitchen, with flowers when there are flowers," he said. "Empty when there are not." He nodded. Rebecca held out her bandaged hand, the one scarred lightly from the flood wire. Grant looked at it before taking it. His palm was warm, rough, and careful. She did not pull away. "Yes," she said. The wedding took place in March, when the desert was still brown, but the cottonwoods showed a green haze if a person loved spring enough to look closely. It was a small church wedding because Mrs. Haskett insisted a woman who had endured gossip deserved witnesses when joy came. Rebecca wore the brown dress with blue calico at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Bell brought a veil that had yellowed with age, but still held lace fine as frost. Caleb carried the wooden horse in his pocket for courage and stood beside Grant, as if guarding him from escape. Grant wore a new shirt. Rebecca had made it herself. When the preacher asked who gave Rebecca, She lifted her chin before anyone could answer. "I give myself," she said. The preacher blinked, then smiled. "That will do." Grant's eyes shone, though no tear fell. He said his vows plainly. Rebecca said hers the same. No one fainted from romance. No angels appeared. Outside, a wagon horse sneezed during the prayer and made Caleb laugh into his sleeve. Afterward, Abner Haskett shook Rebecca's hand and called her Mrs. Doyle with no poison in it. Silas Venn did not attend. No one missed him. At Cottonwood Draw that evening, the house was full. Tom played fiddle badly. Clem danced with Mrs. Bell until both wheezed. Ezra fell asleep in a chair with a plate balanced on his stomach. Mrs. Haskett arranged food as if commanding troops. Caleb ran between porch and kitchen with a biscuit in each hand, one for himself and one for Moses proper, who had not been invited but accepted blessings where he found them. Rebecca stood for a moment at the edge of the kitchen and watched the table. There was bread enough, beans, ham, potatoes, preserves, coffee, and a cake Mrs. Haskett claimed was not her best, though everyone knew it was. The curtains moved softly in the window. Anna's blue cup sat on the shelf with the first wildflowers of spring. Daniel's letter rested in Rebecca's trunk, no longer a stone, only a voice from a life that had mattered. Grant came beside her. "You've gone quiet. I am counting money." She shook her head. "Plates." He looked at the table too. "Enough? For once?" Caleb came running, breathless and bright. "Mama," Mr. Ezra said, "I can help brand calves when I'm bigger, but not if I keep feeding biscuits to the dog, because then I'll grow up foolish." Rebecca smoothed his hair. "Mr. Ezra knows foolish when he sees it." Grant crouched. "Did you eat supper?" Caleb gave him an offended look. "Twice." "Good." The boy hesitated. Then, in a smaller voice, he asked, "We won't have to leave after the wedding." Rebecca knelt before him, her dress pooling on the clean floorboards. Grant knelt too, slow and careful, so the three of them were near the same height. "No," Rebecca said. "This is home." Caleb looked at Grant. Grant touched the wooden horse in the boy's pocket. "As long as I have breath to work and hands to hold it, yes." Caleb considered that. Then he put one arm around Rebecca's neck and the other around Grant's, pulling them into an awkward embrace that smelled of soap, biscuit, wool, and smoke. Grant closed his eyes. Rebecca felt his hand come to rest gently on her back, not claiming, not rescuing, simply there. That night, after the guests left and the house settled, Rebecca found Caleb asleep in his little room under the blue curtains. The wooden horse stood on the shelf beside the crooked cow and the dog that did not look like Moses. His cheeks were rounder now. One hand lay open on the quilt, no crust hidden in it, no fear clenched there. She tucked the blanket around him and stood a long time. On the porch, Grant waited with 2 cups of coffee. The moon made the yard silver. The repaired fence ran straight toward the pasture. The woodpile stood ready. In the garden, dark earth waited for seed. The barn door held firm. The pump handle shone faintly where hands had worn it smooth. Somewhere in the corral, Biscuit the calf bawled in his sleep as if dreaming of glory. Rebecca took the coffee. Grant looked toward the land. "Storm coming next week, my bay. Then we'll bring in more wood. Fence on the north side needs checking." "Well, check it. Hens are laying in the high loft again. Caleb will negotiate." Grant smiled. A real one this time, small, but unhidden. They sat together on the porch steps, shoulders not quite touching until the night cooled, and they did. No one spoke of rescue. Rescue was too small a word for what had happened. He had offered food, yes, work, shelter, a place to stand when the world had pushed a mother and child to their knees. But Rebecca had brought life into rooms. Grief had boarded shut. Caleb had brought laughter back to a table that had forgotten the sound. And Grant, by choosing them in public and in private, had saved himself from becoming only a man who endured. Years later, folks in Cedar Junction would still tell about the day a hungry child held out a wooden horse to save a ranch. Some toted with too much shine, as people do when hardship is safely behind them. But those who knew the truth remembered the flour blowing across the depot boards, the biscuit dipped in water, the first bowl of beans, the blue cup on the shelf, and a rancher's quiet offer made without taking a woman's dignity in trade. For love, when it is worth keeping, seldom arrives like thunder. More often it comes as bread placed within reach, a latch fixed without being asked, coffee kept warm after dark, a child sleeping with open hands, and two tired souls choosing the same porch when the long day is done.